All right, so if you've been with us as we're looking at the book of Exodus, the life of Moses, or if you've read, at any time, you realize that there is this conflict going on and this battle that's coming, right? It's between God, the Hebrew God, that they worship, and the gods of Egypt, which are, like I said, there's hundreds and thousands of gods in Egypt. It's between Moses, this new leader, who at one time was a prince of Egypt, but now for the last 40 years, he's been a shepherd in the land of Midian. Somebody asked me this week, they said, I realize, so wait a minute, Moses, he doesn't marry Hebrew, he marries Midian. I said, yeah, his wife's Midian and Midianite kids, yeah, that's his family, but God is still going to use him in this. And so, it's the slaves of Egypt, who are the Israelites versus the chariots of Egypt and the warriors and the very powerful and all too. It's a battle, it's a classic battle, very similar, right, to David and Goliath that God sets up. Why? To show who God is and show, what his power is. And it's one of those things that you and I, we constantly battle with as human beings. Who is God? And why is it that we have such a hard time recognizing him as God and relating to him? So let me give you part of what I think is the struggle that we have, and it has to do with who we are as human beings. As human beings, we have a free will. I think the Bible is clear. You get to make your own choices. Yeah, you choose what you're going to do, what you'll be involved in. If you go to Genesis chapter 1, it talks about how God creates everything, and he puts it out there, and he puts Adam and Eve in the garden, and he says, now you may eat of any of the trees in the garden. It's their choice. Go eat of whatever you want to, except for what? One, yeah. So it was limited, but it was not a huge limit, but it points to something about who we are, who I am, who you are. And that is, mankind is free, but my freedom is limited. It's not that I can do anything that I want to do. It's not that I'm capable of anything. I know we like that, and I know we like to say that about ourselves, and there's a part of the culture that does not believe in God and is secular that will always say mankind one day, will inhabit the universe and rule everything and run everything, and just look at our technology, just look at, how much we've learned and how much we've grown. Of course, you might add, and how much we fight with each other and how difficult it is to get along, and but mankind will reach this. Here's the struggle with mankind. You and I are very limited. In fact, I did this with my kids when they were little. Here's what I would say. If you look at me, you can see my limitations. You see the silhouette of, who I am and my size and my arms and my legs. And that's me. Outside of that is not me. So you see my limitations, and in one sense, you recognize me by my limitations. Yeah, that's part of it. How do you recognize God? Because God has no limitations. God has no outline. God, in fact, I would tell my kids, the best illustration of looking at God is just the universe. There you go, there's God. It's just backdrop. And so we don't recognize God very well because that's not how we're used to living life and seeing things. We don't do it that way. And God seems in that sense sort of out of reach and unidentifiable. But then God in the Bible, he identifies himself. He makes himself clear. So much so that you may not realize this, but 2,000 years ago, when God takes on flesh and blood, and he comes to the earth, the Son of God shows up, he is limiting himself so that you and I will recognize him, so that we will understand that he recognizes us. He understands what we're going through, who we are, so he takes on limits. If you want to read about this, Paul loves to write about it in the book of Philippians, 2nd chapter. He talks about the limits that God takes on through his son Jesus to come and be in this life and in this earth, not just as a human, to live as a human being, but he lived as an ordinary human being, pretty poor human being. He suffers, he's convicted falsely. You may say, well, I was convicted falsely. So, yeah. So he goes through everything that you and I go through, and he's even crucified. He gives his life on the cross, again, so that he can identify with us, so that we could identify with him also, so that he could give his life for our life. So God tries to communicate in a way that you and I will understand that we get it. But it's still a struggle for us. And even in Moses' day, it's going to be a struggle. How do you identify God? Remember a couple of weeks ago, we talked about how God gives a name for himself to Moses. But it's not like any name you and I would come up with. It was basically the name that says, I am who I am. I have been what I've always been. It's sort of like one of the reasons Moses, when he talks about God to the people, he will say, and the God of our father Abraham, and he's the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. So he's identifying through the line that came from Abraham, God, and he's been the God in the past. He was always here in the past. He was always watching. He was always planning, always moving us, so that you and I could say, well, he's still here today. He's still got plans. He's still moving. And there is an outcome. There is a conflict. There is a battle. There is a standoff. There's a contest coming between God and the gods that men create, and between God and the mankind that finds itself against God and fighting and pushing back against God. And it's one of those that man can't win, cannot overcome or conquer God, because of who God is. So it kind of brings us to this 5th chapter. But let me jump back just one verse. That we did this from chapter 3 last week, but let me throw it out again also, which is kind of why you have to understand where this conflict is coming from and where it's going to go. This is what in chapter 3 it says in verse 19. It says, this is God speaking. He says, but I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a what? Unless a mighty hand forces him. That's God. And he's going to make this happen, and man can't stop it from happening. In fact, what he's saying is, I will make things happen that even the Pharaoh and Egypt and the armies and their power, they don't want to happen, but I will, to show who I am, I will make this happen. And that's who God is and how God does things. So the question is, why then these misunderstandings? Where does all this come from that we hear and all? Well, it comes from the fact that we see life one way, or Egypt saw life one way, Pharaoh saw life one way, and God is saying, yeah, but that's not how I see it. And it's this struggle between the God who we cannot limit and cannot define, and limited man who wants to see life the way he sees life and deal with life the way he deals with life. So here's where it picks up. This is in chapter number 5. This is verse number 1 says this. After this presentation to Israel's leaders. So Moses has shown up, Aaron's with him. They've gone to the leaders of Israel, and they've done the signs that Moses was going to do to prove where he'd come from. It says, after that, Moses and Aaron went, and they spoke to who now? Pharaoh. This is going to be the conflict between Moses and Pharaoh. They told him, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go so that they may have a festival in my honor in the wilderness. Now, this is going to be the struggle with Pharaoh, because this is a challenge to who he is and his power. The Israelites work for him. They're slaves. They make bricks. They have herds, they farm. Mostly it's the bricks that are going to come into issue here. And bricks, these bricks are important because they were builders. They were building all the time, and they used mud brick as the foundation of what they built. So here's what it says in verse number 2. This is Pharaoh. I love this. He says, is that so? Retorted Pharaoh. You know what the word retort means? It's a great word, isn't it? It doesn't just mean answer and say back to. It means you say it in a way that's sort of looking down at the other person, and sort of you think you're more skillful and wittier than them. Is that so? It's kind of like Pharaoh's doing it kind of like, oh, you want to is if your God gets to decide and you're speaking to the man who does decide. And Pharaoh's making sure that they understand who he is. He goes on, he says this, and who is the Lord? Why should I listen to him and let Israel go? I don't know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. So this is the challenge. This is the battle that's there. Listen, I will tell you, I still think the battle is still going on. We still struggle in the same way. It is difficult for us to get our hands around it and to understand and to grasp this conflict that is going on, because we still think I can do anything. I'm a man, I'm a person. I am unlimited. I'm capable of what, and we like to think of ourselves that way, not necessarily think of God that way. In fact, we tend to think of God not that way so many times. When I was first working, I wrote software. It was not what I wanted to do for a living, but it was one of those things that I kind of jumped into a job early on. Had a friend that worked for the same company, and he was Christian in a sense. I'm trying to explain I don't know how to say it. He would, on paper, I guess, he didn't go to church, but he was Christian in a sense, but he had very, very strong secular views. And one time we got into a discussion, and he was a great talker, and he was a really good friend. And he said, look, I can do anything I want to do. There's no limit to what I can become and what I can do. Anybody want to? And I said, okay. He said, well, name something I can't do. So this is what I did. I thought, okay, man, this is great. It's easy. It's a great setup. I said, why don't you come pick me up in your private jet? I'll do it. Look, he made a little bit more than I made at the time, but I know what he made, and it wasn't enough. It was barely enough to buy a car, so it wasn't anything, as far as buying and so he did. He told me, he said, a year from today, let's mark it on the calendar, a year from today, I will show up and I will pick you up in my private jet, because I can do anything I set my mind to, and there's no limit to what I can do. So about 6 months later, he switched companies, moved to another state, never saw him again, because he's not buying a jet. He was a good guy. He was good at what he did, but he's not buying a jet, And there are limits to who we are. Of course there are. Are you okay with that? You have to be, because it's true. And it doesn't matter what you achieve, how much you make, what sort of recognition you get, you're still limited. You have choices. You get to make your choices, but you're still limited in your choices. God is still unlimited in what he can do. And because of that, what you're going to see in the story, it takes a long time for the story to unfold, because God's not in a hurry. He doesn't have to say, in a year, I will. He can do it as long as he wants to. He can take it through whatever process he wants to, because God is after the ultimate battle, and he's trying to reach us and convince us of something. And he doesn't worry about the time frame as far as that is concerned. He says this in verse number 3. So Aaron and Moses persisted. The God of the Hebrews has met with us, they declared. So let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness so we can offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. If we don't, they say, he will kill us with a plague or with the sword. So it says in verse 4, Pharaoh replied, Moses and Aaron, why are you distracting the people from their task? That's why I said, misinformation. So what he has decided is that's not the real issue, or at least he can't say that's the real issue. The real issue is you don't want to work. You're not going to get the people to do their job in this area. So he says, get back to work. Look, there are many of your people in the land, and you are stopping them from their work. That same day, Pharaoh sent this order to the Egyptian slave drivers and to the Israelite foremen. So two different groups. There were the Egyptians, who their task was to drive the Israelites to do their job to make the bricks. And then there were foremen who were actually Israelites who were also a part of that, worked for the slave drivers. He says, do not supply them any more straw for making bricks. Make the people get it themselves, but require them to make the same number of bricks as before. Don't reduce the quota. They are, say it with me, what? Yeah, I'd say he's changing it. Now, is this because Misinformation makes his heart hard, Pharaoh's heart, or is it because of his hard heart he's determined a different solution or a different truth that he's doing this? Yeah, there's the struggle. That's why they're crying out, let us go, sacrifice to our God. Load them down with more bricks. Make them sweat. That will teach them to listen to, say this with me, to what? Yeah, so he is determined. It's not true. I am Pharaoh. What I say is true. I've got the army to back me up. I've got the nation of Egypt to back me up. I have the wealth to back me up. I have the technology that you don't have to back me up. I have everything that I need to prove that what I say is real and what I say is true. I think that's a struggle for us. In fact, Joni, my wife, she's here. She got me to listen to a series earlier this year. I don't know if you ever watched it before, but ESPN does this series called 30 for 30. And they did one on Lance Armstrong. You know who Lance Armstrong is, right? And Lance did the Live Strong, wonderful to help cancer patients and all too. But Lance is most known for, how many times did he win the Tour de France? 7 times. Okay, good. I know somebody would help me here because I said 5 at the last service and I was corrected. So good, okay. 7 times he won the Tour de France. He had cancer. He recovers from the cancer. No one believed he could even ride again. Not only did he come back and ride, he won it 7 years in a row. He retired, then he tried to come back and ride again. Here's the struggle for Lance Armstrong. He cheats. He cheated. And he knew he was cheating. And all the other riders knew he was cheating, and they called him out because there's no way someone can recover that fast and do what he's doing. He was doing what they call doping. They use some other drugs with it and all too, but this is what they do. They're basically taking the blood and they're pumping up the blood by taking it and then putting more in so that the blood of someone who goes through this can do about 10% more as far as delivering oxygen to the muscles and eliminating the carbon dioxide and the lactic acid and the things that slow you down. So if you think about it, at athletes at their level who could do the Tour de France, this is an incredible advantage to get a 10% gain. And as Lance Armstrong would say, everybody was doing it. And apparently a lot of people were doing it. My son tells me if you go back and you look at who won the Tour de France in those years, he won it. Then, of course, his title was taken away and someone else was given it. And then they find that person was doping and they did it. And so it's hard to figure out who won it, because they keep eliminating the person that was given the title after that, because this was his struggle. Let me tell you why I thought it was so fascinating. Because Lance Armstrong exhibits something that we would say is a good thing about human beings, and that is this determination, this stubbornness, this human will that says, I will do this, and I will do this, and I will do this, and you're gonna go for it, and you're not gonna let anybody stop you no matter what. After I watched it, I told my wife, I said, if Lance can go out there and get on a bike and go, I can do the same thing. She said, well, knock yourself out. So, I did for one day. And then I was like, it's hot outside. Okay, so, but don't you admire that? Of course you do. And all human beings admire that. We love that about humans. But here's the problem. What happens when you go and you go and you're determined and you're living a lie? That was Lance's struggle. In fact, he said this is wonderful in the interviews. He says this. He said, everybody else lied because they were doping also, but I lied thousands and thousands and thousands of times. Because they were asked, were you doping? You say no, and it goes on, and maybe you're asked again, but probably not. He said, I was asked every day. Every interview, because when you're winning the Tour de France, you're in all kind of interviews constantly, and I'm asked over and over and over and over again. And what he does is, you know what? He hardens his what? I'm not gonna say I'm cheating. I'm not gonna say I'm doping. He's locked in. He can't confess it. He can't say. In fact, it's really, like I said, it's 2 hours long. It's wonderful. And I think one of the amazing things, when he gets caught, finally, he does get caught. He has to go, he actually calls and sets up an interview with Oprah. And he decides, I'm gonna do this on my terms. And he confesses it or talks about it. But if you listen to him and you see it afterwards, doesn't really say he was doing anything wrong. I was cheating, but I really wasn't cheating because, and it's Lance. He's determined that it will still be on his terms, and he will drive it, and he will drive it, and he will drive it. See, I think this is what Pharaoh is. Pharaoh is the king of all Egypt. His power is wrapped up in Egypt. Will he say there is a God who is greater than the Egyptian gods or greater than the, no. And the longer he goes, the more he gets into it, the more he is determined whether it's true or not, I will not give in. That's what makes me great, and that's what makes me powerful, is this unwillingness to yield to the question. I was watching some of the special about the assassination of Charlie Kirk, if you watch it, and the young man that shot him, tragic, you know. But he said this to his friend. He texted his friend about his rifle, and he was hoping to get the rifle before authorities got it. And he said, hopefully I can get it and I can carry this to the grave. In other words, no one will ever know what I did. See, the problem with that is we think that. We think if I just hang on, I just keep doing it, carry it to the grave, then no one will ever know. It doesn't work that way. Not if there's a God. Not if he has a way of judging the human heart and dealing with us. He knows. And you never can hide it from him. Not in the same way that you can hide it from human beings, which means you don't ever get away with it. And the only thing you can do is what Moses is doing, is you have to, in some way, you fight God and you fight God, but you have to yield to God. That's what Moses does, and he's fighting him the whole time too. But he yields to God because he's God. He has plans. He's going to accomplish his plans. So you have a choice to whether or not you will give in to that and whether you will give yourself to that and say, God, so what are your plans for me? Or whether you'll fight it your whole life hoping you can get to the end and nobody catches the lies that are there in your life. But still they do. When it's all over, still they do. I think this is very tied into who the Egyptians were and who the pharaohs were. And let me do this for you. And I know you're going to say this maybe more than I want to know. A little bit of history here. So the Egyptians, if you know, when the pharaohs died, they would mummify them, they would embalm them. So they would take out the organs and they would put them in canopic jars. I just like saying that. I don't know what a canopic jar is, but they would put it in canopic jars and they would store the organs. But there was one organ in the pharaoh that was left in the organ, or left in the body. You know what the organ was? It was the heart. The heart was left in the pharaoh. And the reason was because the heart was key as far as the future was concerned. And they looked at the heart as the center of the emotions and the will and the mind, that was where it came from. And the pharaoh needed the heart because at some point the pharaoh would have to go to judgment. And in the judgment, there was like a scale there. And in the judgment afterlife, the heart was taken out and put on the scale. And one of the gods would place a feather on the other side. And if the heart outweighed the feather, the pharaoh was judged guilty and condemned. If the feather was heavy, in other words, if the heart was light, and I know you're thinking, what do you mean if the heart is light? It meant if it carried no weight of sin and wrongdoing, then he would enter in without any kind of judgment. So they had a concept of this also the same way that you and I have a concept of this. So here's how they would deal with it. I think this is really interesting. There's a little beetle. Some of them are green, some of them are black, in Egyptian life. And you see them all the time in the movies because they go, you know, and they're bad in the movies, you know, so they come after you. And these little beetles that are called cherubs, I'm sorry, help me with that. Yeah, that's right, that's what they're called. They were carved and they were put as an amulet on the chest of the pharaoh when he was buried. The reason is these little guys actually sometimes are called dung beetles or mud beetles because they make a ball and they push it with their back legs. And in Egypt, you can see them rolling across the desert, and that's just what they do. And so it's a picture to them of the afterlife and the son coming up in the morning, reborn, and then dying. And so it was a picture of them pushing the son across. I know you think this is way more, but this is how they saw it. And so it became very sacred, and we put him on there, and there was an incantation, a spell that was carved on these little beetles, and it came from the Book of the Dead. 30B is what it's called. So, I'm real smart about those things. And so, it was carved on there. And this incantation, this spell, would prevent the heart of the Pharaoh from confessing his sins. It would weigh down the heart, is how they saw it. The weight of it would keep the heart from, they would say lying, but they meant by lying was telling the bad things that the Pharaoh had done, and this would weigh it down so that he would not be judged. I know you're going to say, that's a really strange way to see the afterlife. Yeah, but that's how they understood it, and that's how they saw it, because they knew the sins of the heart would weigh you down, and they would cause you to fall into judgment and how you saw yourself, because they just believed that's how their gods saw it. So these beetles were very sacred to them. This is Pharaoh's life. This is Egypt's life. I think it points to something about who God is and why it says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Just to let you know, twice in Exodus it says, and God in the future, he says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart. It was predictive, right? He's going to harden his heart. The next 6 times, it says that Pharaoh hardened his own heart. This was active at the time. And then about halfway through the plagues, that all of a sudden starts saying, and God hardened Pharaoh's heart. I think that's because that's the way it works. You and I harden our heart. We say, I'm not going to tell the truth. I'm going to hide this. I'm going to act like I can do whatever I want to do. And at some point, as you go through life, Pharaoh goes through life, God brings the plagues. God is hardening his heart because he cannot yield. He just hardens it again and again and again, hoping, just like the beetle that's placed on his heart, that he can protect himself from his sins or from his faults or from the things that would condemn him or cause his life to fall into judgment. He will not yield. He hardens his heart. How about you and I? It's human. We love it. There's this determination, this discipline. I will not yield. I will never get it. And somehow that's going to get us to the destination that we want. But the problem is God sees and God knows. And no beetle, no spell out of the Book of the Dead, no determination on our part, no matter how much we want it, how much we are determined that we will not yield, and this is truth, whether you think it is or not, I will not yield. None of that actually gets us to where we want to go. So I put this in your outline. So why does God harden Pharaoh's heart? Or you could say, why does God allow Pharaoh to harden his heart? Or why does God allow people to harden their heart? I thought of 4 reasons out of this. I just saw these in there. First of all, to display his own power. That this is who God is, that we can determine that we're going to harden our heart. It doesn't change who God is, and it doesn't limit God. We may be limiting ourselves. Second thing is, especially for Pharaoh, it was to reveal the Pharaoh's rebellion. So that as he rebels, as he fights back, it's going to be revealed as the plagues come and as those things whip through Egypt. It will be clear God is God. He is more powerful. You can't resist him. Kind of like Lance, you can say, I'm not going to yield, I'm not going to say I did it, and eventually you get caught anyway. And then what are you going to do? Are you going to yield then? How about this? I think the third one, which is one of the things that's important for us too, is it shows God's grace to the Israelites, the Hebrews, that he has chosen this group of people to rescue them. It's not because they're perfect. It's not because they're not even hard-hearted. God describes them that way sometimes. But he constantly works on them, and he constantly breaks them so that they will yield themselves to him, because he wants to show his grace and his mercy through them. He does the same thing for us as Gentiles because of Jesus. He's shown his grace and his mercy to us through the breaking of his own son, through Jesus, and how compassionate he is. And then I really like the fourth one. It's my favorite one, I have to admit, is to make his name and his glory known, so that you will see what God is like as opposed to what people are like, what human beings are like. It's not, you shouldn't love people, you should. God loves people. But he is still above us. He's different than we are. He has no limits in what he can do, even though we are incredibly limited and incredibly, because of that, dependent on him. So let me finish. Here's the second half of this chapter. I know you think, well, it took a long time to go. So this will go fast. Here's what he says in verse number 10. He says, so the slave drivers and the foremen went out. They told the people, this is what Pharaoh says. This is what the king of Egypt says. I will not provide any more straw for you. Go and get it yourselves. Find it wherever you can. But you must produce just as many bricks as before. So the people scattered throughout the land of Egypt in search of stubble, because they've got to provide their own cut up straw. Meanwhile, verse 13, the Egyptian slave drivers continued to push hard. Meet your daily quota of bricks, just as you did when we provided you with straw, they demanded. Then they whipped the Israelite foremen. So these are the guys who are Israelites, but they're over the group. They're beating them that they put in charge of the work crews. Why haven't you met the quotas either yesterday or today, they demanded. So they were constantly falling behind. Verse 15, so the Israelite foremen, they go to Pharaoh and they plead with him. Please don't treat your servants like this, they begged. We are given no straw, but the slave drivers still demand make bricks. We are being beaten, but it isn't our fault. Your own people are to blame. But Pharaoh shouted, you're just what? Yeah, because it doesn't fit Pharaoh's plans. So he has decided a different reason for this. You're just lazy. That's why you're saying, let us go up and sacrifice to the Lord. Now get back to work. No straw will be given to you. You must still produce the full quota of bricks. The Israelite foremen could see that they were in serious trouble when they were told, you must not reduce the number of bricks you make each day. As they left Pharaoh's court, they confronted Moses and Aaron, who were waiting outside for them. The foreman said to them, may the Lord judge and punish you for making us stink. I like that he puts it in there. We stink before the Pharaoh and his officials. You have put a sword into their hands, an excuse to kill us. Then Moses went back to the Lord and protested. Because Moses is still struggling with this. He's still trying to figure out how this is going to be done. He's still learning about who God is and just how powerful God is. So he goes back and he protests. He says, look, why have you brought all this trouble on your own people, Lord? Why did you send me? Ever since I came to Pharaoh as your spokesperson, he has been even more brutal to your people. And you have done what? Nothing, because Moses is impatient. You've done nothing to rescue them. So here's what I want to remind you of. The last week, we were talking about how God was softening Moses. He was preparing Moses, taking him through all kind of things, in those 40 years in the wilderness, and especially at the very end, because he was going to use him. That's what God does with the people he's going to use. He softens us toward him. We move on, and even though we're struggling, we have a difficult time, we still keep moving because we believe him and we trust him. So our attitude and our heart softens toward God rather than hardening toward God, as Pharaoh's heart continued to get harder and harder toward God. Why? Because the battle is coming. And as Pharaoh hardened his heart and would not yield to God, the battle is coming. The contest will be on. And God, because of who he is and his resources, he's going to win this battle. And he wants Moses to understand and Moses to believe and to trust him. Let's pray together. And as we pray, even now, maybe there's some things in your life that you say, man, there's certainly some things in my life where I have hardened my heart. I know better. I know I shouldn't. But I'm just kind of banking on the fact that I can get through this, that the truth will not be revealed, that my commitment to me above all else at any cost, no matter what, that will be the deciding characteristic, the deciding factor. And I realize, Lord, I need you. I can't make it without you. I don't know what's coming. You do. I'm not smart enough to figure out everything or to connive my way forward. But there's a tendency, there is in all of us, there is in me, to want to do it that way, somehow thinking that's the way to success. That's the way to make it work. So Lord, soften my heart. Even the things that you've brought in my life that I don't like, I know that sometimes those are the things you bring just to remind me of how much I need you. That in my weakness, in my brokenness, you point me toward your son Jesus, to the hope that I really do need in this life, that is in him, not in my will, my strength, my stubbornness, but in his strength, his willingness to go as far as he had to go in order to do the right thing, to make things right between you, God, and me. You can pray something like this: Lord Jesus, thank you. Thank you for giving your life for me, for coming to this earth and living a life the way I have to live life, with all the struggles that I got to go through, so you could prove that you understand, you know, but you never yielded. You never gave in. You continued to be righteous, even when you were falsely accused and when you had to give your life for sins that you never committed. Lord Jesus, forgive me. Give me a new strength, a new hope, a new life to live for you, the life that you have given me, the place that you have put me. In Jesus' name I pray.